David Sirota is a longtime investigative journalist, a very dogged one at that. He's a best-selling author. He's the founder of The Lever, which is a The Lever News, which is a reader-supported outlet reshaping political and economic reporting in America. He identifies, I believe, explicitly as someone on the progressive left, and yet his reporting is exactly the kind of journalism we need, where he just pursues facts without that kind of agenda driving it. His work has often shaped national headlines, from exposing Wall Street's secrecy to prompting government investigations. And he was even nominated for an Academy Award for co-creating the Netflix blockbuster Don't Look Up. I've known David for a long time. We've had him on our show before. It's always great to have him back. Good to see you, David. Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, obviously, I want to talk about the latest developments in Trump's tariff plan. As I'm sure you know, earlier today, he announced a 90-day pause on that tariff plan, as many of his billionaire funders, like Bill Ackman, had been calling for. The only exception is China, where he's keeping those tariffs in place, and now they're retaliating. And I want to get into the kind of minutia of the deal itself and what your thoughts are. But before I get to that, I just want to ask you kind of like as a broader perspective. For as long as I can remember, the left's critique of the Democratic Party, people like the Clintons, was that they had devastated the manufacturing base, deindustrialized the middle of the country, shipped jobs overseas with things like NAFTA and the Obama-Clinton support for TPP. They were just, very aggressive advocates of free trade. And the argument was that was when the Democratic Party started representing much more the kind of affluent and wealthy class in Wall Street and abandoned what had been their base of the working class. That's certainly a lot of how working class voters perceive it too. I mean, if you lose your jobs, if your town becomes shuttered, you're going to have a good understanding, even if you're not a political junkie, of who and what did that. And I guess, Trump did do some tariffs in the first term, but this is really the first time in years where we have a president standing up and saying the current status quo of globalism, free trade, offshoring jobs has destroyed the United States in so many ways, and it's time that we have to implement a new financial order that doesn't produce those kinds of consequences for the United States. Do you consider that fact, independent of the specifics of Trump's tariff policy, to be a positive development?
Well, it depends on how successful the tariffs are. And by that, I mean, it depends on whether the tariff policy actually gets this right. Because if the tariff policy doesn't get things right, I think there's going to be a backlash to the free trade backlash. So I agree with you that Donald Trump has made an opportunity out of Democrats' advocacy for things like NAFTA, the China PNTR deal, the TPP that you mentioned, all sorts of free trade deals. By the way, the Democrats weren't alone. George W. Bush's administration pushed for all sorts of free trade deals. So
McCain,
both parties,
all of them.
the sort of John McCain, exactly. So this is a sort of bipartisan elite push to over the last 30 years to change America's trade policy into a tariff-free trade policy, which Ross Perot, by the way, warned of. Ross Perot warned that if you force American workers to compete with workers making $1 a day in countries that do not have any real environmental laws or any environmental enforcement, you're going to essentially incentivize corporations to pick up shop and troll the world for the worst possible conditions, the most exploitable possible conditions. That has happened, and the Democrats have really stuck with free trade. Most of the Republican Party had, up until this point, stuck with that idea that this sort of transition would be great for everybody because the benefits would outweigh the consequences, the benefits being lower prices. Now, there's even dispute over whether that's true, whether there's been studies showing that the benefits of lower prices have actually not outweighed the losses in wages and jobs for the average American. And so Trump has tapped into a very real and, to my mind, very legitimate backlash. The problem is, to my mind, is that what Trump is proposing is not really a strategic use of tariffs in a way that I see, at least I don't see any evidence yet, that is really designed to rebuild manufacturing in the United States. And doing sort of across-the-board tariffs with no timetable for implementation, to allow factories to be reshored, for the production capacity to be rebuilt, I think then raises the question, well, what are we really doing here? Just throwing up tariffs, you wake up one day and say it's Liberation Day, throwing up tariffs is not giving industry a chance to react to the tariffs, to build that production capacity, to rehire Americans to do manufacturing jobs. And so I think, in a sense, what we're seeing now is kind of a power grab by Trump. Trump wants to, and maybe a shock to the system, a way to say, hey, we're not doing free trade anymore, so I'm going to shock the system in a really aggressive way. And there's also a power grab element where every corporation that wants an exemption has to come and kiss the ring of the president to try to get an exemption. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't see necessarily any evidence that this is a well thought out use of tariffs that will deliver what Trump says it will deliver. And if it doesn't deliver it, this is a long way of getting to your question, is if it doesn't deliver it, what I fear is that gives the people who push NAFTA, the people who push China PNTR, an opportunity to say all tariffs are bad, all tariffs are destructive, and there is no such thing as a smart, managed, fair trade policy. We have to continue with the free trade policy that we've been with for the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fair concern. I guess time will tell what he is planning to do. I mean, I think today was a kind of retreat or maybe a modification. And I want to talk about that in a second with this pause and the idea that now we're going to negotiate not just tariffs, but investment or opening up factories in the U.S. or whatever. We'll see if that works out. I just want to ask one more question, though, about the sort of debate that has been provoked. I saw Trump's billionaire Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who had long worked for George Soros and his wealth fund, and then opened up his own hedge fund, was very successful in trading in the way that makes you a billionaire. Always has been a Republican for the most part, but once he had to go out and defend these tariffs, I saw him at least twice, maybe three times, in a very clear and passionate way arguing this. He was saying, when people are saying, well, you have to be concerned about the reaction of the stock market, the decline in the stock market. And he was saying, look, the top 10% of wealth in the United States owns 90% of the stock market. The bottom 90% of the stock market owns 10% of the wealth. And the reason for that is we pursued this policy and this global trade system, free trade system for so long that only benefited Wall Street. And so who cares if Wall Street is angry? Now is the time where we can't please and pleasure and accommodate Wall Street. We instead have to be thinking about Main Street and the ordinary person. And then on the other hand, I'm not saying this is true of all Democrats, obviously, but the kind of mainstream Democratic reaction to this is like, oh my God, look what Trump's doing. Wall Street is collapsing. Kind of saying like, oh, our concern has to be what Wall Street wants, what Wall Street thinks is good. I mean, again, independent of your concern about the Trump tariffs and their results, which I want to get to next, having the Trump Treasury Secretary come out with this extremely populist rhetoric with these accurate facts about the vast gap in wealth that this system has created in the United States and the need to erode it or erase it or reverse it, I mean, isn't that in some way a helpful contribution to how Americans understand the economy?
I think it is, in the sense that I think that reminding the country that Wall Street is not Main Street is important. When you turn on cable TV news, you're led to believe that Wall Street is Main Street, that the stock market is the economy, when clearly it isn't. And I've been kind of struck by the fact that this Treasury Secretary, who comes from Wall Street, in many instances that I've seen him interviewed, he sounds like Bernie Sanders.
Exactly.
I mean, Bernie Sanders has been making that point, but that stat. Now, I also don't think it's that simple in this way. That it is true that the wealthiest 10% own about 93% of the stock market. But that doesn't mean the other 90% owns no part of that stock market or has no connection to what that stock market reflects. I mean, millions of people have 401k plans. That may not represent among working class, middle class people a large portion of the stock market, but it represents at an individual level a significant portion of people's retirement savings if they're lucky enough to have retirement savings. Same thing for union pension funds. Union pension funds have large holdings in the stock market. So I don't think it separates as cleanly as the statistic seems to suggest it does. I think that the country it does have the country's economy is woven into, or at least has a relationship with the stock market. And I don't think the stock market going down is something that we can just say, oh, it completely doesn't matter, or even celebrating it going down. There is a linkage there. I don't necessarily think that we need to take policy cues. Oh, if this or that policy happens and the stock market reacts, that means the policy is bad. That when I see liberals or conservatives say that, oh, look at this policy, the stock market's going down, that's not the right way to judge the merits of a policy. I mean, for instance, if there was a President Bernie Sanders and he put forward a Medicare for all bill, my guess would be the stock market, for at least a little bit, might react negatively to that because the stock market reflects a lot of health insurance companies. That doesn't mean the policy is wrong. So I don't like the idea that look at the stock market and the stock market should tell us what policy is correct. I would say look at the stock market to see what potential sort of impact this is going to have, broadly speaking. But again, we're talking hours after Trump set aside or at least delayed some of these tariffs, and the stock market went back up. So it's also a pretty volatile, sort of not consistent barometer of what's really going on.
For sure. I think the statistic that I've seen, and like right in this area, is something like 60% of Americans have some money in the stock market,
right,
and 40% have none. And just anecdotally, I mean, I know, kind of normies in my life, people who are not very particularly focused on politics, are not partisan at all, but they've all been concerned about the decline of their 401k, exactly as you said, which is tied to the stock market performance. That's people's retirements. All right, so I don't know what Trump planned from the start. I'm not sure he necessarily knew, but I got the sense, David, that given how many decades Trump has been pounding this issue, like other countries are ripping us off, the United States has to stop this, we're taking a bloodbath, whatever, that he was prepared. And there's been some reporting in general that Trump, in his second term, probably not thinking about a third term in reality, kind of has a sort of devil may care attitude. Like, he doesn't care if what he does creates negative media reaction, even performs badly in the polls. He has an idea of what he wants to do in his second term, and he's going to do it no matter what. And so my belief is that he really was truthful about what he was saying from the start, which was, look, we are going to have some short-term pain. You're just going to have to bear it, because on the other side of that, we're going to finally have a fairer and more prosperous system for everybody. And then suddenly today, he announces this 90-day pause, which is what several of his billionaire supporters were calling for. Bill Ackman was actually on Monday, he said exactly that. I want a 90-day pause on this. And then it wasn't just even the stock market. What I think was alarming so many people was what the bond market was doing, which has taken down presidents before, in the UK and France and elsewhere. People are super afraid of bondholders in the bond market. And then Trump did a very uncharacteristic reversal, obviously tried to paint it in a positive light or whatever. There's a lot of talk these days about how the United States is an oligarchy, kind of like the richest people dictate power. The president's constrained, no matter who the president is, by what they want, by their interests. Was this an example illustrating that to you, where it's kind of, I guess, even Trump, with his lack of political concerns, was sort of forced to retreat by the reaction of the wealthiest people?
I think it's hard to psychoanalyze Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So I try not to try to get inside of his mind. What I can say is this: I think you're absolutely right that this is one of the areas that Donald Trump has actually been, one of the few areas that he's actually been consistent on, at least in terms of rhetoric. He has been talking about a fairer trade policy. Whether you agree with the policy or not, he has been talking about this issue for a very, very long time. I mean, he almost ran for president in 2000 under the party of Ross Perot. I mean, you can go look that up, the Reform Party. So this is something that he has thought a lot about, spoken a lot about, written at times about in his books. So he clearly has a pretty set in stone views, overarching views about America's current trading system, the sort of free trade system. Now, he may have a theory about how he is going to try to get a supposedly fairer deal, or at least what he perceives to be a fairer deal. By maybe this is one of these situations where he thinks there's sort of the madman theory. I'm going to show the world that I'm really serious about this by saying I'm doing, 100% tariff on China. We're doing across the board tariffs on all these countries, and slowly but surely, after I make that announcement, the world is going to get scared and try to cut more favorable trade deals with our country to try kind of even things out. Like, is this three-dimensional chess? Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe it's not. It's really hard to know. Was he controlled by the oligarchs in this 90-day pause, or was that, or did it come to be part of his thinking that it would be a good negotiating strategy, that ultimately he is fearful of actually crashing the stock market, crashing the economy, and so this is all a game of chicken to try to get a better policy? Or, Glenn, is this just a pure power grab? Right. I mean, I don't think we can write that out of the story here. This is in the context of Donald Trump in all sorts of ways, kind of trying to create an even larger unitary executive theory across the government, firing people at independent agencies, consolidating power. Tariffs are another way to consolidate power, forcing corporations and economic actors to, again, kiss the ring of the president to try to get exemptions. And I go back to, where is Congress here? Because to my mind, as much as this is a chaotic situation, it's a reflection of the fact that Congress has delegated so much authority to the president. Tariffs are written into the Constitution as something that should be the purview, that is the purview of Congress. Congress has, in various ways, ceded that authority to presidents to wake up one morning and a president can say, I'm going to use this or that emergency power to create tariffs. I would argue that one of the benefits of the way the Constitution was written was that especially in the light of the Tea Party, like the literal Tea Party, was that the founders didn't want that to happen specifically on tariff policy, that the founders wanted tariff policy to have to go through a slower process so that there was consensus around it. And so my hope is that out of this, there is some effort for Congress to reclaim some of that tariff power that it's supposed to have. Because at a base level, one thing is for sure, whatever tariff policy is in place needs to be consistent to create an environment for investment. If a company is thinking about reshoring jobs or not reshoring jobs, one thing it wants to know, it really has to know, is whether the tariff policy is going to be in place for the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, to know whether it really should make that investment billions of dollars worth in a big factory or not. Right now, the last thing we have right now, I think it's fair to say, is consistency and stability, with Trump saying we're going to do tariffs, we're not going to do tariffs. Like, I think whether you're for higher tariffs, lower tariffs, free trade, not free trade, the fact that it's not been consistent in this period, I don't think is very good.
I want to delve into the issue with Congress in just a second, but you mentioned Ross Perot a couple times. I just wanted to say, when that 1992 election happened, which is where Ross Perot ran as a third-party candidate, very well may have helped Bill Clinton get elected. I was very young. I didn't really understand free trade. But what I remember about it is, the sucking sound. Like, that was his big, kind of calling card, which was, oh, you hear that sucking sound? That's the sound of jobs being moved out of the United States to Mexico, to parts of the developing world if we do NAFTA. And he was debating on that stage two hardcore free traders in Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. If you go back and look at those debates, which I've done a couple times, it is actually shocking how prescient he was, how much he understood exactly what was going to happen. And I remember so well at the time, that the media basically depicted him as like this unserious crackpot, this like crazy conspiracy theories, which is what they do to third-party candidates. You had Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush advocating policies that would destroy the country. He was the only one who foresaw that on that stage, and yet they were like, "Oh, this guy is a lunatic, a crackpot. You can just laugh at him, even though he was a billionaire and understood business very well." All right, look. You mentioned this thing with Congress, and it's so true. Like, it's not just in the area of tariffs, but also like war powers, right? Like, we're not supposed to ever go to war unless Congress declares war. There's Federalist Papers on this that, if you're going to fight a war, you want to make sure the people are consenting to it through the ones closest to them, which is not the president, but their representatives in their district. There's no role. Congress doesn't want any role in war. They want to leave that to the president. It's like too hard of a call. They don't want that on there. Same with tariffs, same with everything. They've kind of just abdicated, any role at all. That said, one thing that caught my attention was a couple days ago, there's this legislation pending in both the Senate and the House to take back that power, to say the president doesn't have a right to unilaterally impose tariffs. If he does, we have the right to nullify them, or our approval is needed. And there was reporting that at least, a dozen, maybe more, House Republicans are ready to sign on to that. And that would be the first real break with Republicans and Trump. And I guess I wasn't surprised by that, because the one thing that could get House Republicans to break from Trump is if their corporate donors are angry and afraid. Like, if their corporate donors are saying, you need to do something about this, that's probably the one thing that can move them. Again, I agree with you completely that we can't psychoanalyze Trump, but do you think that might have been a factor, the concern that the Congress is going to step in and take away some of those powers from Trump?
I certainly think that's probably part of the White House's calculus, that they are getting pressure, they are hearing from Republicans, and I think you're right. Republican lawmakers are hearing from both their donors, but they're probably also hearing from their constituents who are afraid of higher prices. And I think we can't write that out of the story. I mean, Donald Trump did campaign. In some ways, he campaigned on two contradictory things, at least in the short term. There is a contradiction in saying, I am going to put in tariffs that are going to make trade fairer, and saying my top priority is bringing down inflation. Tariffs are inherently inflationary. Now, that doesn't mean a strategic use of tariffs isn't a good idea. That doesn't mean the inflation, that if you strategically use tariffs carefully, that doesn't mean the inflation is permanent or long term. So there is a tension there. Obviously, the public is sensitive to inflation for good reason. It's basically the affordability crisis. So I think Republicans are under sort of dual pressure from people worried about higher prices, their voters, their constituents, and the corporate class, which is worried about having to change its business model around a new tariff policy. And I think that here's the thing, in a sense, regardless of the motivation, I think it would be a good thing if the Congress took back some power here and, frankly, got into the habit of taking back power that it's supposed to have under the Constitution across the board. I don't think we want to live in a country where we perceive the president to be an elected king. And there's a difference between a president and an elected king. A president is supposed to be the head of a co-equal branch of government. That wasn't incidental. It was set up that way by the founders who had lived under a king. An elected king, which I think a lot of people perceive the president to be, is basically somebody who's elected who gets to do whatever they want. I mean, we've seen the White House make this argument, anything Trump does is the small d democratic process because he was elected, which is not true in the sense that, yes, he was elected, but what's not true is that he wasn't elected to be the only branch of government. There were 435 other elections for a separate branch that is supposed to be a check on that power. I don't think it's a good thing for business. I don't think it's a good thing for workers. I don't think it's a good thing for civil liberties, war policy, any of this, that we now live in a country where it's presumed to be normalized and acceptable for one person to wake up on a given day and radically change a policy across the board without any consensus from the other 435 people who were elected in 435 separate elections.
1775 and Rumble have teamed up to launch the first anti-aging coffee, and it's almost gone. They dropped 1,000 longevity bundles, And after blowing through most of them, they extended the sale and added a few more. But this is the final push. Once they're gone, they're not coming back. Sort of like maybe American jobs, manufacturing jobs. For $99, you're getting over $250 in value. 2 bags of longevity coffee infused with CAAKG to support cellular health and reduce biological age. And yes, they'll be selling biological age tests soon to prove it. Plus an ultra rare pea berry roast that makes up less than 5% of global crops. An exclusive 1775 merch. This is real, bold, high quality coffee. Single origin, small farm, small batch, not some throwaway promo roast. It's made for people who really do give a damn about their coffee and about the values of the company. If you believe in America and freedom and in not selling for weak corporate nonsense, this is your coffee. Every dollar you spend gets you an entry to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 in cash. That's 99 entries locked in. And with less than a month left, the bundle guarantees you have a real shot. Head to 1775coffee.com/Glenn. Fuel up, live long, and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.